my name is Kimberly Farros, and this is for Project 4, Philosophy of Art, the last one. This is the last assignment I have due, and for my last thing, I wanted to do a video. Even though it's due in like less than 5 hours, I'm gonna try my best to do a video. So let's hopefully this works out. And I have my emotional support stuffed animal with me, so hopefully we can get through this. So, for the piece I chose for my final project was from the San Antonio Museum of Art, and it was for me one of the most, I think, kind of unique paintings I remember seeing over there at the museum. I remember this was one that really stuck with me even after the museum, and I remember thinking about it for a really long time because I think it's a very topical thing right now, especially just like in the political climate that we're in. And the one I chose for this project was let's see the name, by Margarita Cabrera, American born, Mexico. And so this one was, it's just, as I'm gonna put some slides before, but you can see it's just a cactus. um and I remember first walking up to this piece of art, and this, if I remember correctly, it's in the Latin American section. So I remember walking up to this piece of art and just being very well, the first thing I thought of was Mexico, was like my home. Because even over here where I live, there's a bunch of nopales, there's a bunch of cactus and cacti. So when I first saw it, I thought of home, and it reminded me of, the little, I forget what the little red things are called, but when we used to eat those, or when my parents would tell me stories of them eating this. And so I remember just looking at this painting, and I just remember it's made of like clothing. So I remember like looking at the material, and there's little dangling pieces from it, from the cloth or whatever. And I remember just being like looking at it, and it looked kind of depressing, like, in a way. I don't know how to describe it, but it made me feel like it looked sad. It felt sad to me. And I remember just staring at this painting. I walked like as far as I could, like around, and I kept walking back and forth looking at this painting and trying to understand it, because I feel like there was something there, but I just wasn't getting it at first. So I like stood there for a few minutes, and at first, like I said, I just thought, like, instantly just reminded me of Mexico, reminded me of home. And I remember staring at it and just thinking, this is a really good cactus made out of like regular material. But as I continued to stare at it, and as I read the description, because like I said, I don't read the description until after I stare at a piece of art for a few minutes, I read the description, and I'm gonna read it out to you, even though you're gonna see it in the slides before. But it says, constructed from U.S. Border Patrol uniforms, this sculpture centers on social and community issues, part of a series entitled Space in Between. It was produced through community workshops in which women who migrated to the U.S. from Mexico and Central America embroidered the cactus leaves with images that represent their own stories. Through an intersection of contemporary art practices and indigenous Mexican art and craft traditions, Cabrea's cacti offer an investigation of U.S. Mexico relations and a homage to the collective labor of women. After reading this description, the painting made, like, not the painting, the work of art made complete sense. Like, I felt like I understood that inherently when I saw the cactus and I saw the material. There's like little people and like little things on it, and it genuinely felt like it was telling me a story that I just couldn't fully understand until I read the description, and how it's talking about U.S. Border Patrol and just immigration issues, and that really spoke to me because that is a very big thing that's going on right now. Immigration, in politics, and the ICE raids and things that are happening to a lot of my own people right now. And I'm not gonna lie, I think I started crying. I started crying. If I remember correctly, I think I did. Like looking back, because it's been a little bit since I've been to the San Antonio Museum, but I remember when I was there, I started crying because it made me really emotional. Because, like, there's tons of people who are struggling right now, and for them trying to come to America, even if it isn't quote unquote the right way, to make a better life for themselves, or families being torn apart. I don't know, it just makes me really emotional because it's such a real thing that many people that even I know have had to go through and suffer through. And I don't know, it just makes me really sad. And I remember crying to this piece of art, and I remember how much it felt like they were truly trying to weave a story into this piece of art. They were trying to show the struggle of an immigrant or a woman who was traveling through the border. And for it to be the material that of a US border agent, oh, I felt like that was really poignant because especially right now with tensions and border patrol and ICE, you know, like it just feels really like it's really thought provoking, and for me, it made me just reflect on me, my people, people I've known in my life who have had to go through immigration and who've had to struggle with that. And so, yeah, that's my interaction with this piece of art. That's how I took this piece of art and understood it, and how it really spoke to me. And I just remember being really moved by this piece of art, and it's one of my favorites at the San Antonio Art Museum just because it just speaks so much about me and a lot of my people. So, yeah. So I completely, I just filmed my entire intentionalism section, and I forgot to click the record button. So, here we are, redoing it all over again. Anyways, but intentionalism. So for my piece of art, I chose the last thing I had to cover was intentionalism, and that's something I know was really topical, and we talked. I don't remember if we talked about it too much in class, but I definitely know a bunch of people used intentionalism in their art projects, or not art projects, their presentation projects, and I completely get why, because intentionalism I feel is a very fun conversation to have, and I really liked bringing it even into this piece of art. And so mainly the book, like the homework you assigned us to read, and it talking about intentionalism, I feel like it's very interesting because intentionalism, I feel like they're right. You either agree or you disagree, and a lot of the times, and I think that's the most fun part about intentionalism because a lot of people, especially I remember in our class, a lot of people agreed that the author is like completely done, like they're cooked. Like once a piece of art is done, and it's up to the interpretation of the person who consumes that piece of media. And so, some of my favorite quotes from the reading was, once the author is removed, the claim to decipher a text becomes quite futile. And I agree and disagree with this quote from the readings because if we take the example of the painting that I saw, not the painting, the piece of work, um, it's just a cactus. Have you no context behind it, you can see it's just a cactus and it just happens to be made out of cloth. And so I think the intention behind it can be hidden or can be difficult to communicate um, if you aren't in the culture. So for me, as somebody who is Mexican, who nopales have been part of my culture, have something we've eaten, something, I've been hurt by, like, it's something I knew, and something I could be like, oh, I know. And while I didn't fully understand what the author was trying to say without reading the description, even without the description, unconsciously, I think I knew what this piece of art was trying to depict. And because I instantly, it just connected and reminded me of my culture. It reminded me of my people, of my home, and things that a lot of Mexican or Latin American people would see and be like, oh, I kind of understand this. Versus somebody who is um, not Mexican or doesn't have nopales deep in their culture. Um, you may look at this and to be like, that really is just a cactus that is depicting family, because it has like those little, excuse me, those little pieces of patchwork on it, and you could see it and be like, this is just depicting a cactus, and maybe there is deeper meaning here. And I feel like you could still grasp it with or without the description, but the description does truly add so much more to the piece of artwork. And had it not been for the description of the author, I don't think you would have been able to tell fully, because it's the material of US Border Patrol agents. And just reading the description, and it's basically just a small like tidbit talking about the struggles of a Mexican immigrant um in our landscape right now. And I feel like that's very potent and important to talk about. And especially, it's depicted in a very subtle way. A cactus, something that grows in a really rocky, dry, desolate area, showing how a lot of people who are struggling through like hard times, who, let's say, want to immigrate to America, there's a reason for that. There's a lot of things going on in their lives that are leading them to make these decisions. And I think, intentionally or unintentionally, which I think it is intentional, it's just such a beautiful piece of art, and it just makes so much sense. And I think, had you been somebody who isn't a part of this culture, I feel like it may have been slightly lost on you, because you don't know what the author's trying to say, you're not connected to the culture. It would have been a lot harder. So I can understand that perspective, and had the author or had the description not been there, you might not have been able to fully understand it. As for another quote I really liked, was, the reader is a space on which all the quotations that make up a writing are inscribed without any of them being lost. A text's unity lies not in its origin, but in its destination. Yet this destination cannot any longer be personal. The reader is without history, biography, psychology. He is simply that someone who holds together in a single field all the traces by which the written text is constituted. So, just looking at these things, when it comes to the death of the author, if we completely throw out the intentions of an author and what they're trying to say, some pieces of artwork you may not be able to fully understand, right? Maybe you can get an inkling or like a view. I kind of could tie this into like my last project with the modernist painting that was depicting like the sand or the beach and everything. You kind of look at that and you're like, what the hell is this, right? And you can't fully understand or grasp what something is. And for me, it took reading that description and reanalyzing the entire painting to kind of understand, oh, I think I get it now. But some things don't inherently need it. But there are pieces of work who do. And I think, especially modernist kind of paintings or works of art that are a little bit more abstract, I don't think it's inherently necessary, because I like leaving art up to like people's own ideas and whatever. But I do think a description or the author's input plays a really big role in how people can perceive or take away from a piece of art that has a lot of intention behind it, as the cactus one or as the one I used in my last project. So, yeah. Okay, for my second topic, I want to talk about Plato, because I don't know, I just wanted to have something a little bit fun, and just kind of wanted to like encapsulate a lot of the things that we talked about in class. And I really like Plato. I think he's really fun to talk about. But first, I want to ask the question: would Plato like this painting? I think, I think he would, because, and I feel like it's a bit iffy because this could be a yes and a no, because Plato hates art that elicits an emotional response or a response that some people can't understand. And I feel like this piece of artwork can do that, but it's also it elicits an emotional response, but it's very like political, and it's very moral. Like Plato talks about there's only certain types of art that he appreciates or thinks should be okay, and that's one per um talking about like heroism and like certain kinds of politics, and I think this one definitely does. It's talking about, just a story and like the struggle of immigrants, and I don't think it's painting anybody inherently in a negative light, this piece of artwork, but it is inherently, I think, showing the struggle of an immigrant and how there can be a struggle with themselves and just immigration. And I think that's really cool and one of my favorite things about this piece of artwork. And also, I think a funny thing is that Plato talks about things being imitation, and this is an imitation. Like, this is an imitation of a cactus. This is not a real cactus at all. It's made of cloth, and Plato talks about things being imitations of themselves, and how people who create these imitations, they can't fully understand themselves, like these artists. And I think overall, I feel like this is something that can kind of connect, and Plato, I feel like he would understand the implications of a piece of art like this, because this isn't just something that's aesthetic. It has a deeper and more moral meaning. There is a lot of intention behind it. There is a lot of hidden politics that you may not, like I said, if you're not maybe a part of the culture or maybe even the artists themselves, you may not get this. It may go over your head, and you may have to have it explained to you for it to elicit an emotional response. You may look at it and be like, what is this? Because you don't understand. And having that, I think Plato would be fine with it, because it is depicting something that isn't just supposed to elicit an emotional response, something that isn't just calling for you to be emotional. It's depicting real things that people are doing and struggling with, and has ties to politics and heroism. And I think these things that Plato inherently was fine with being depicted in art. Conclusion. I really liked this project. I think that this is a little bit not out of my depth or something I would normally discuss, but I think it is a little bit different, and especially getting into politics. Feel like it's something very different than what I normally cover, but I do think it's something that is very important to cover, and I really like talking about intentionalism. I like talking about Plato, because I think those are two very popular things that we even discussed in class, and I think it's something that is important. And as like kind of bringing up the class discussion, I'm gonna be real honest, it's the end of semester. I can't really think of anything that we've discussed in class at this point, because my brain is just so tired of thinking. But if I have to try to tie this into like my entire presentation, I can hear my sibling. um I want to bring up the example of food. And I remember in class we were before the presentations talking about pie, and I remember you saying that you didn't like pumpkin pie and you didn't like um food like that. And I remember being like, I was gagged because I love pumpkin pie, and I think it's interesting taking it as a in a way of like philosophy or even inherently intentionalism, because for me, pumpkin pie is something that is just a comfort food. For me, it's comfort. It's something I've grown up eating. It's something that when I think of warmth and comfort. I don't think of it being a gourd. I don't have the image of a gourd in mind. I just think of comfort um, and warmth when I think of a pie, or I think of a glass of milk and like whipped cream, versus you who doesn't eat pumpkin pie, especially around the holidays. I wouldn't be associated with like joyous meanings or like joyous thoughts because eat you don't eat pie. You don't It's not something that's inherently a part of your life. And this is probably such a bad thing to place for like our class discussion, but I'm going to be real honest. I can't really think of anything else right now. So, yeah. My bad. I just wanted to say a little bye or like a little message. I really liked this class, and I really liked you as a professor, and I enjoyed this class a lot. It really had me thinking, and I enjoyed the readings, even though sometimes it was a bit of a pain because it wasn't the most reading, but sometimes I just didn't want to read, but I still did. And overall, I really enjoyed this class. I really liked you as a professor. Um, and I hope you do well in any of your other classes. And uh, thank you for being my professor for this semester. I hope I'm gonna say what one of my other professors said. I hope you have a great life because I'm probably never gonna see you again. And also, just thank you. I met a lot of cool people in this class that are my friends now. So yeah, thank you for everything. Thank you for being an awesome professor. And yeah, I hope you have a good day. Goodbye. You get a little Evie bye as well.